up, Headspaces? Viwe Joka, the brother from the ancient mother. We're doing another classic anniversary review. Now, if it's the first time you've watched some of these, what we do is we showcase, honor, and basically analyze monumental projects that have dropped in African hip-hop and kind of look at their legacy as it's trickled throughout the years. And the project that I'm reviewing today is from basically probably the most important hip-hop group on the continent. When you talk about the strides that people have made to take the dialogue of how Africans have digested hip-hop back to America, you would be remiss if you didn't talk notably and most saliently about Prophets of the City. They are by far the consummate and leading practitioners of the art form and the culture who created what I would call a cultural bridge. The cultural bridge that is there to create a consistent intersection between how hip-hop emerged as an expression of oppression to those in the diaspora, and how that ripples into those who felt that oppression on the continent. Prophets of the City spoke in a language of this fundamentally Americanized movement which had roots in blackness, and they spoke to it in a language which was thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly and apologetically and radically and even militantly African. And it is this little extra special punch of black radical pride that makes Prophets of the City a unique act as it stands. Because when you think of African hip-hop, a lot of African hip-hop artists tended to go more the route of speaking to themes that encourage globalization, speaking to themes that kind of cohesively move within the channels of capitalism. So in other words, they speak to an Africa that can safely be embraced by the West and the rest of the world. Not Prophets of the City though. Prophets of the City spoke vehemently against imperialism, colonialism, in a sense that was both historical and very fucking immediate. To give you a quick flashback, this is a group which started rapping in the late 80s, and this is basically still apartheid. You're right in the hot spot of oppression as it manifests itself. So a crudely important part of how Prophets of the City manifest is the fact that they're doing, living and breathing hip-hop in a time where it's difficult to do most things as a black person, let alone express yourself with art that seeks to free itself from whiteness. They are taking the themes of the b-boy, the techniques of the DJ, the rebellious chants and subsequent mentality to rise above the odds that the MC would imbue on the crowd, and they're using that literally as a political force to try and give out a semblance of possible change in a time where many didn't even know that it would actually happen. I think we need to understand that Prophets of the City started rapping when we didn't really know if apartheid would ever really see its demise. Maybe many did, but the question was always how long it would be. And if you go into that kind of mindset, they were making hip-hop in times that were more uncertain than the times we live in today. And I find that extremely amazing to make art in times which are so fundamentally limiting to your sense of beingness, and still have it resonate to a moment where right now we have more physical proximity, but it feels like we might still be in the same kind of predicament psychologically. Now I'm here to review not their first album. This was not their first time around the rodeo. Like I said, these cats had spiraled in an industry which was at that time filled with disco infused assimilations of that black pop, and at the very same time splintered with emanations here and there of a jazz which had went from Marabi to Kwela and was finding itself in a place that was uniquely golden to our own unique era. This is South Africa at a time where you do have a pop culture which allows for blackness to creep in. This is a time where we're talking about the Yvonne Chaka Chakas telling the DJ to never stop playing their songs. This is the time where Messi Pagela is telling us about how fucking uncomfortable it is to walk in her shoes. So this is a time where there is no foreign relationship between pop culture and blackness. White people are smart enough to understand that black people are a product, if not the most fundamental product, because what is a slave if not effective if you don't feed them some semblance of satisfaction? So I think if we're talking about the regurgitation of art that spoke to us in a way, this wasn't something that was foreign, but Prophets of the City took it a level further. They played with a youth movement which was pretty much still in its inception in the States. And they were taking elements of it, not just any elements of it, because mind you, rap music and hip-hop in general has aspects which are both redeemable and not redeemable. This thing of kind of romanticizing hip-hop as a thorough, morally regenerative movement is unrealistic to how it grew. These were people in the streets, and with all the motivation was a sense of selfish ambition. With all of the holistic, unified themes of nationalism were also themes of self-important capitalist aspiration. So when we talk about hip-hop, it doesn't only belong in the purview of something Pan-African and political. It definitely belongs to the realm of something vastly and viciously capitalistic. And if you ask me, the capitalist side won. But this was a time where both heads of this massive hip-hop dragon were trying to find a sense of core identity in the alchemy of the people. And Prophets of the City chose the political aspect. They could have easily just chosen to be flashy rappers who wore two-piece Adidas tracksuits and would have probably been a South African Run DMC. But no, they chose a public enemy stance. They chose a stance which spoke to more radicalization of identity and having a clear-cut understanding of how the fucking revolution would occur. Because if we're not trying to work for it, then we're working against it. And there was no middle ground for Prophets of the City. So these young people literally threw themselves in the middle of a dynamic which was literally a hotspot, and they made Age of Truth. Now Age of Truth, as long as a project as it is probably the most monumental piece of South African hip-hop, because there isn't a single reference to fucking bitches, there isn't a single reference to making money, there isn't a single reference to commercialized aspiration, and yet there is hope. And I found that freaking phenomenal, because we tend to, and who's we? Modern rap audiences, even modern lovers of the culture of hip-hop, tend to have this idea that we can't speak hope unless we speak it in the language of capitalism. We can't comfort the black person if we do not somehow encourage money making in the process. We can't imagine a picture of coming out of this capitalistic captivity if we do not try to find how we can work within it. Golden era hip-hop, with its blatant worship of money, has disillusioned us to the point where we don't even think it's possible to speak hope to people unless you're talking about making money. There are thousands of a verse where rappers have literally made this statement: if it ain't about money, don't talk about it. And this album ain't about money, and yet there's so much to reap from this. Why? It was made in a time that's literally at the cusp of what would be the end of apartheid publicly, but the beginning of a private apartheid, the beginning of this more sinister, subliminal apartheid that would move into the crevices of business and still keep its claws firmly on the land, while still giving us culture and the illusion of freedom through allowing us to walk the beaches and the streets of places where we formerly could not walk in. Now, prophets of the city spoke to this again when it was murky, and the courage and the skill that they had. I mean, if we're talking skill, this is a project that comes from a time where the rap styles were very minimal, so younger generations might get a little bit disengaged, but I believe the content value, if you're interested in understanding the history that led to this momentous period you're able to make hip-hop right now, is worth the ingestion. The subject matter circles from our very own conflicted need to understand how our leaders have compromised for a freedom which seemed to not be the one that was fought for. It vacillates into corners of the township experience. It utilizes stratamia vocal tones, the corner singing of Mbatanga influenced hymns, the Afrikaans radicalized street of Kapsa slang, the Soweto centered but very much expressive South African broadband township language, while still assimilating all of that into that fundamental classical hip hop break beat, screechy, scratch, call the DJ, inundated with so much art. Now, I say Public Enemy because stylistically it's very close to that. It's wild, it's loud, it's got a lot of signals, and it's an album that speaks to the time and speaks to the generation. And I think even till this day, while listening to this, all of those visceral images of multi-dimensional screaming, of yearning for better, and also confronting the worst in what we felt was those who had the best for us. It's this conundrum of human interplay that makes this project so monumentously important than any other project in this country, and I think by far in the continent as a whole. Because if we're going to talk about a blueprint to how to have the conversation of where we are as Africans and how that trickles into what being African is imaged as in the West, this album set a lot of the tones for that conversation. It's beyond the berets and the lifted up fists and the African medallions. It's literally questioning ideas as they meet us. And this questioning of ideas is something that I think is not done anymore in African rap. You can filter into these ideas, you can play with them, but to literally deconstruct them, to break them apart, to violently ask of them more than they give is something prophets of the city were sincerely asking for. So I think musically this project is able to kind of feel like a piece of art that stands as literally a history book of South Africa in a crucial time, and because of that it stands to be a living testament to our own reality. It asks the modern South African, what have you done with your freedom? It asks the modern South African, is this even the kind of freedom you can do anything worthwhile with? It asks the modern South African, is freedom of a truer sense? And when I say truer sense, I mean the freedom that gives the basic necessity for you to feel fed physically and emotionally, so that you can feel that there is possibility in your country and thus the world. Is that kind of freedom even possible? Or is it a dream we chase simply to have a dream to chase in the first place? So with this review, I'd like to give thanks to Shaneen Ishmael, Reddy D, and all of the very changing, shifting members of Prophets of the City, Junior, Ramon, Mark, and their impactful deliberate approach to making protest music when protesting was a thing you could literally get killed for. These cats were revolutionary. And I think the question is also, because many of them are alive, because Reddy D is still scratching, because Shanine is still here actively moving the culture, because Junior and Ishmael are still somewhere in Johannesburg doing something. What does this say about us as a people? What does it say about how we treat those who fight for the messages that allow us to code our current realities? What does it say about them? Did their words and their ideologies speak for them? Or were they just enamored by revolution when the safest thing is just to be capitalistic? I think this project allows us to ask these questions so beautifully and succinctly through hindsight, because it allows us to have the clarity of charting the course of rap and hip-hop literally down a path where this is the most monumental thing we can ever start with. So, prophets of the city are literally, if there had to be a cosmogony of African hip-hop, these would be beyond deities. They'd be the spirits who move beneath the cosmos, who speak into things being possible in the first place. So if you're interested in the growth of African hip-hop, if you're an African hip-hop practitioner, if you're a rapper, if you're a breakdancer or graffiti artist, there is no way that you can do what you do and not listen to this album and not find a semblance of meaning in how to, if not reinvent your current path, find ways to make it more meaningful. So here's to a classic, here's to a body of work that questions us even beyond the moment that it was made. And here's to the constant ringing of our conscience. Because if there isn't art which seeks to stretch beyond the comfort of what it is given by capitalism and the industry, then we never have people who ask us the questions we don't want to hear. Because it is only when we ask the questions we don't want to hear that we might get the answers that we need. So salute to prophets of the city, and I think their namesake speak in a very deep way. To be a prophet is to foresee both the worst and the best of what a possibility has. And I think that over the years, their name has come to life in ways that I don't think they ever anticipated. They have spoken to every reality we live in today. And it makes me think of that Bible scripture of a prophet that is not respected in his own land. Are we that land? I don't know.